Oh, hi guys. Welcome back to English 3.1. This is our third class and we're still in chapter 1. Okay, I hope you guys have been having a good time and not too tired for our lesson today. So, we take it from where we left off yesterday. First, allow me to share my screen. Have I been making sense to you so far? Because I don't know. I haven't got any feedback from you guys. Like you guys don't talk to me, so I don't know if I should slow down or speed up or spend more time on any particular topics. But I assume that as long as you guys don't make any complaints, I'm on the right track. Okay. So screen has been shared. Let's dive in to our chapter 1. So yesterday we talked about terms like analyze. We know what analyze mean, and that is to identify the relationship across all the variables. Argue. So argues means to be able to come up with a claim and to be able to justify your claim. All right. Now that is, I think, one of the most important skills in writing. Yeah, being able to justify your claim. So let's move on to assess. Assess and evaluate mean the same thing. So what exactly is evaluate? Let's have a look at evaluate. So it says here, evaluate is to make a judgment about the effectiveness and success of the subject. What is good and bad about it? Why? Describe your criteria for your judgment. Okay. Evaluate is kind of like grading. So first of all, what are we usually asked to evaluate, right? What do you think we can evaluate? Well, I think one of the things that can be evaluated is solutions to a problem. Okay, suppose let's talk about some simple problems. How about transportation? So you want to go from RE, okay, where our school is located, to Victory Monument. Right. That's the problem, right? That's what we try to solve. So we have options like we can walk, or we can take a bus, we can take the BTS, or we can get a cab or an Uber. I mean, Grab, right? Grab taxi, right? We use Grab back home in Thailand. Over here they use Uber. All right, so there are many options, right? So which is the best? We have to evaluate. So when evaluate solutions, the first thing we want to look at is the effectiveness. So what is effectiveness? Well, effectiveness is about the ability to meet your main objective. So our problem is all about displacing ourselves or moving ourselves from one point to another, from RE to Victory Monument. Apparently, every transport that we can think of will work, right? But walking, yes, it's a mode of transportation. It works. We can run. BTS, everything's work that we can imagine, except for maybe transport like ferry, because we don't have a waterway that connects RE to Victory Monument. So ferry is not an option. Helicopter is not an option because we don't have a place where helicopters can land on top of our building. Or there may be, I don't know. But let's say, even though we do, but at Victory Monument, I doubt if there's going to be any spot where we could safely land a helicopter. So those are not effective solutions because they will not do the job. But they will not help us to meet our main targets or main objectives. Okay, so every other option is effective. But just because they're effective doesn't mean they're the best solution, because we have to look at other criteria like efficiency. Yeah. So what exactly is efficiency? Efficiency is all about the use of our resources. Okay, the use of our resources. So if you want to go from RE to Victory Monument, whichever mode of transport we decide to take, all right, we have to spend our time and our money, right? So those two are our resources. Okay, and each transportation will require varying amount of resources. Example, if we decide to walk, now walking, we have to spend a lot of time resources because it's take a long time, right? It's a long distance. However, it saves us a lot of money because we're not spending a dime as we walk, right? So maybe you think, hey, maybe is walking the best solution or the best mode of transport? But then again, you want to think about times in terms of money. So if you're going to compare two things, right, we have to be able to sort of measure it using the same unit. Well, how do we measure time, right? We use unit like minutes, seconds, right? But that is not comparable with money. So we have to figure out a way so that we can convert time to money. So you can think about how much are you worth? Like what's your hour rate? How much money you can make every minute, every hours, right? You have to think about that. So suppose you are worth I don't know, $600 or 600 Thai baht, right? An hour. So that means if you have to walk for half an hour, you are actually losing 300 baht of your opportunity. Okay, so if you look at it this way, then you will see that walking is not really the best alternative. It's actually costly because you have to invest in a lot of time. And since time is money, you actually, losing opportunity to make money. Okay, right. So walking is actually expensive if you look at it from this perspective, right? Half an hour, and if you work like 600 baht an hour, walking half an hour, you lose 300 baht. So it's quite expensive. And if you look at other options like the bus, yes, how much does the bus cost? Well, the bus doesn't cost that much, right? About 10, 15 baht or 20, I don't know nowadays. But you have to wait for a bus, right? You have to wait for it. So you have waiting time. And sometimes the bus gets stuck in the traffic, right? So it's probably not going to be the best alternative either. Maybe it's going to take 20 minutes, to go from here to Victory Monument. Sometimes, right? 10, 20 minutes in that spectrum. Now, BTS. BTS is a little bit more expensive than the bus, but I think it doesn't take that much time. All right, of course, you have to wait in the platform, but it's never that long, and there's no traffic for the BTS. So, from the perspective of time, it is quite cheap, right? It is quite cheap, and since the ticket doesn't cost too much, so it is safe to say that the BTS is probably the most efficient mode of transport in comparison to every other mode of transport. Okay, so this is how you evaluate a solution. You look at each solution in terms of effectiveness. Is it going to do its job? Is it meeting your target? And then you look at the resources that you have to use. But that's not all. Other than effectiveness and efficiency, you can also think about the practicality, okay? Like how practical it is, how possible it is to actually implement that solution. A long time ago, all right, some of you probably don't remember, but I still do. There was this accident that happened in northern Thailand where a team of football players got trapped inside the cave, right? I think the name of the cave was Khao Nang Non, right? That's up north. So, okay, so they walk into the cave, right? And it was dark in there, and they didn't know that it was going to rain after they moved in. Yeah, so after they entered the cave, and after they had walked for some distance, it started raining so heavily. And when they were like at the in the middle of the cave, I'm not sure how far down they walked in there, but by the time they decided to turn around and walk out, the cave has already been flooded. Okay, um, and there has been many rescue teams around the world who wanted to come and give a hand to rescue the young football players. And that was this guy who came up with this idea of inflatable tunnel. All right, I'm not sure who it was. Some say it was Elon Musk, but I'm not sure. I didn't double check, to be honest, but yeah, I heard this from one of the news sources, that there was an idea of using an inflatable tube. So basically, they're going to get a professional scuba diver, and that scuba diver is going to carry with him an inflatable tube all the way to where the football players were located. Okay, and then they're going to inflate it. So that tunnels, inflatable tunnels, when they inflate it, it's going to form like this tunnel that you see in the playground. So it's going to prevent waters from coming in, and everyone could just crawl into that inflatable tunnels to the exit. Well, it sounds good. It sounds like it's something that you could do in a computer simulation or in a game, but in real life, it's not going to be that easy, right? Because the cave is very tight, right? And the scuba diver is dark in there too. Like they can't see where they are. So imagine that you are diving in a pitch black cave. You don't see anything, and you are underwater, right? You don't know how far you have to go. You can't see anything. How difficult it is. How scary would it be to do that, right? So it's a no. That's not happening. So even though something might seem to work in theory, doesn't mean it's practical. Because in real life, you have to take into consideration things like people's emotion, people's belief, people's culture, custom, all these things. Okay, so just because something works in theory doesn't mean it's really practical. All right, so that's another aspect you want to think about in addition to effectiveness and efficiency. And the other thing is pros and cons. Yes, everything has what we call a ripple effects. Yeah, which could be positive, which could also be negative, right? So think about building like a SkyTrain or underground railway. Okay, so the objective of building underground railway or elevated railway is to give people more access to public transport, right? It's to make people life easy, and it's also to reduce air pollution because it can encourage more people to use public transportation so that they don't have to use their own cars. Yeah, which is great idea. So not only does this solution improve make our life convenience, it also makes the air qualities better, but it also has a negative impacts because whenever they have to build underground railway, they will a lot of business have to shut down because there's going to be barricades. It's going to be hard for, say, you run a business. It's going to be hard for customer to come to your shop to do business with you to buy items. So business have to close down, right? That's a negative effect. And construction in Bangkok is going to create a lot of air pollution. So it's if you look at it this way, it's a little counterproductive because our goal is to reduce air pollution, but in the process of building elevated railway, which could take years to finish, could be 3 years. So in the process, we are actually polluting the air, right? Okay, so those are the negative side effects, and something you might want to think about. All right, so just an idea. So that's how you evaluate. Next is, okay, we are looking at classifying. So we say that classify is the ability to organize subject into different groups and explain why the grouping makes sense. Okay, so apparently I think we came across this direction words once when we were asked to describe different types of tourists. Okay, describe types of tourists, that's the same thing as classify. So classify means breaking some things down into different categories. So we have to be able to see what is the things that certain variables have in common. Like if I ask you to classify people, right? The first thing that just comes to your mind is what would be the criteria that we would use to tell the difference from one person to another. You can use many things, like, okay, classify people in terms of their personality, classify people in terms of their nationalities, right? Okay, so you need to have some sort of criteria that we could use to divide up your data set. Okay, that's classify. We talked about compare already, didn't we? Okay, so compare is to look for similarities. Contrast is to point out the differences, look for the differences. Okay, define, we also mentioned that already, give meaning to the subject. Describe, we talked about that already. All right, next is discuss. So when we have to discuss something, most of the time, we are actually comparing and contrasting. We are usually asked to discuss, two different approaches to some problems. So when they ask you to discuss, what they want you to do is to look for, compare and contrast two solutions in terms of the pros and cons in terms of their effectiveness, in terms of efficiency. So that's what discuss means. Okay, so discuss, every time they ask somebody asks you to discuss something, look for similarities, look for differences. All right, moving on to explain. All right, it is not likely that somebody will straight out ask you, hey, please explain something. No, that's not going to happen, right? But explanation, of giving explanation, is part of writing. It's something that you have to do even when nobody asks you to. Why do we have to explain? Because that's part of making our argument strong. Okay, well, imagine this scenario. Okay, oops, sorry. Imagine this scenario where you want to convince a child, okay, not to put a glass of iced beverage on a wooden table. Okay. All right. So let me just draw some pictures. Okay. So here's a glass of there's some ice in it. Okay. That's a straw. And here's a wooden table. All right. And okay. That's a wooden table. Try to make it look like a piece of wood. Okay, so you, but it looks more like some plates rather than woods. So I apologize for that. I'm not a good drawer. Maybe I'll just leave that alone and put like a label instead, indicating that is made of wood, wooden table. Okay, so you make a claim and you say, don't put cold drinks on the wooden table. All right, so you sort of giving an orders, right? But this by itself is a claim. So in other words, you are telling people that, hey, cold drinks should not be on the table. And a child will definitely ask you why, right? Why can't we put that cold drinks on the table? And you're gonna say something like, oh, because it's gonna be bad for the table. And the child will be like, why is it bad for the table? And you're gonna say like, oh, there will be some waters that is formed at the bottom of our, iced chocolate or iced coffee. And the students, I mean, the child will keep on asking, why? How does this happen? So he's going to get to a point when you don't have explanation anymore. Yeah, like not many people can explain why is there water that is forming at the bottom of our iced coffee, right? So it's get to the point where you ran out of explanation. Now, if it is something that you don't experience on a daily basis, nobody will believe you. Like, right? No one will believe you. But it's good thing that this phenomenon is very common, especially during warm days, like during our summer, right? You buy maybe Amazon white chocolate macchiato, right, from Amazon, or iced chocolate, and then you walk out the store and you sit on a table. You leave your cup or your glass on that wooden table for a while. It doesn't even have to be a wooden table; it could be a glass table, and you start seeing some small water puddle that is forming around the bottom, around the base of your glass. You see it. So If you can see it, then you believe it, right? So this kind of thing doesn't really require explanation because there's evidence everywhere. Okay, but let's assume that you talk to somebody who's living in a high altitude area or in a very cold place, right? Okay, so if you talk to somebody who's lived in Antarctica or somewhere close to the North Pole, they might not experience this event very often, all right, because the air doesn't carry so much moisture in North Pole or in Antarctica. So this phenomenon is going to be very rare for those who live in very cold area, where the temperatures outside is actually lower than the temperature in the ice beverage. Okay, so they're not going to see puddle. Right. So that's why it is important, to be able to give a very clear explanation. So you have to think about questions that people might ask, things that they're going to want to know when you making any claim. Let's go back to this claim just a little bit. Don't put cold drinks on wooden table. Now I'm going to give you two different versions for explanation, and I'll let you be the judge. You will decide which is a better explanation and which explanation is more likely to convince you not to put this iced coffee on wooden table. All right, so let's have a look at version 1. All right, explanation 1. So explanation 1. Don't put cold drinks on a wooden table because there will be a puddle forming at the base of your glass. Of your glass, which can damage the table. Okay, because the wood is going to absorb water, and when it absorbs water, the tissue is going to get very soft, right? And when it's soft, it will not be able to withstand the weight of an object that you put on it. So you can make like a hole or a dent when you put like heavy object on it. And also mold can be formed. I mean, mold are going to be growing in a wet area, like area where there's a lot of moisture, right? You can see molds growing on your table, which is not good. Okay, that's explanation 1. Here is explanation 2. Okay, don't put cold drinks on these wooden tables. So why? In fact, I don't just want to say the wooden table. I want to say a wooden table. So any wooden table, don't do this. Not just this particular wooden table, any wooden table. All right, so explanation 2. Okay, I'm gonna start by saying that our air contains water, but it's not in liquid form, but is in the form of gas or vapor. Our air, so air is around us, it has water in it, but it's not liquid. It's not something that you see in your glass or from water running from the tap. It's not like that. It's in vapor form, so you cannot see it. Okay, vapor. When the vapor comes into contact with our glass of cold beverage, it has the potential to condense, which means changing its form. I mean, changing from vapor to liquid water. Has the potential to condense, right? Changing form, changing from vapor to liquid water. When it reaches the dew point. So the dew point is the temperature at which vapor begins to condense or change in form, right? Okay. So imagine you have, a glass of, iced chocolate, and there's around you, there's some vapor. So all these little dots are vapor. Okay. The temperature outside during a hot days in Thailand, that's probably about 35 degrees Celsius. But the temperature on the surface of your iced coffee might be about, I don't know, negative, because it's, well, let's say 1 degree Celsius. Okay, let's say 1 degree Celsius. So the vapor surrounding your glass, when it comes into contact with the glass, and let's say its dew point is at about 5 degrees Celsius. Let's say dew point is about 5 degrees Celsius. So when the temperatures from this vapor keep dropping from 35 degrees until it reaches 5, what happens is it's condensed. It's turned into this water droplet, right? And you can observe that whenever you buy some cold drinks and you sit outside, you're gonna see droplets, because that's when vapor condensed to liquid water. And these droplets are going to be forming on the surface of your glass. But because we have gravity, all these droplets will be pulled downward towards the base. So all these droplets are going to move downward until it reaches the table. And it's going to form this small puddle. Okay. And it depends on how much moisture is in the air. If the air has so much moisture, if it has very high relative humidity, say 80 to 90%, that means more and more water could condense and your puddles will just get larger and larger and larger. Right. And your table's going to get damaged because it will be absorbing so much water. Its tissue going to get really soft. All right. And it won't be able to withstand heavy objects. All right. So I'm just going to continue with the written explanation. I'm going to say beverage has the potential to condense. Okay. So to condense, causing water droplets to be formed on the surface of your glass. Okay. And the gravity will eventually pull them down to create a small puddles at the base. Okay. When the table, I mean the wooden, right? I have to put wooden. When the wooden table absorbs too much water, its tissues becomes, its tissues get softened. Right? To the point where its integrity is compromised. And won't be able to hold heavy objects. All right. So you see, so explanation 2 is not just longer than explanation 1, but it gives you all the reasons why you should not put that cold beverage on a wooden table. It has all the questions. So when somebody read your claim and they understand why, they will be more likely to accept your claim. So that's why explanations matter. So the major difference between explanation 1 and explanation 2 is that explanation 1 is based on personal experience, right? It's based on what somebody has observed. But explanation 2 It is based on the laws of science, right? It's not based just on somebody's experience or somebody's observation. And that's why explanation 2 might be more credible. All right. Moving on to the next identify. I think we talked about that already. Illustrate. Well, illustrate is providing examples. So let's talk about why we have to provide examples. Now, number one, examples serve as evidence. Most of the time, when we make a claim and we are not able to justify it by referring to any law or any principle, then we need to find a lot of examples out there to prove our point, right? Okay, well, for example, say you are superstitious, right? And before you you go to a test, you would go to some shrine, or like a shrine, right? ศาล นะครับ and then you would make a wish, right? You would make a wish that, hey, please help me to pass my exam. Okay, and then you make a promise that in return, if you help me to pass my exam, I will, like, I will dance before you. I will dance before you, or I will buy you some good food, like some whole chicken, something like that. Okay, so you go to the shrine, you make a wish, and then you make a promise. And suppose it's happened, all right? You get what you want, you pass the test. So you believe that it's because of the mysterious power from that shrine. And then you want to convince someone else to go and make that kind of wish. You will then have to tell that person that, hey, this does not just happen to you, but also to many other people who have already done this in the past. Okay, because this is something that cannot be proven scientifically. You cannot conduct an experiment to prove that. So you're going to need a lot of examples to convince people that, hey, this will work. But this kind of this method of justification is not limited to something superstitious. Sometimes science needs a lot of evidence to justify something as well, right? Let's think about this claim. If I make a claim that every living organism needs water, well, can you really explain why we need water? Maybe you can, but there are some organisms that is so tiny, so small, that it barely has any organ, but it still needs water, right? So we don't know for a fact why living organism needs water. We just do, because every living organism that we have found so far, they all needs water. But there could be some living organisms out there that doesn't need water. Think about virus. Would you consider virus to be live organism or not? Some scientists are debating whether virus is actually a living organism or it is not a living organism. And yeah. Okay, so sometimes you just need evidence to prove your point. Examples can also paint a picture, make things more clear to people. Examples say you make claims like we need to consume more fruits with high vitamin C. Now, when you specify that particular nutrients like vitamin C, that means not every fruit will contain a lot of vitamin C. So when you make this kind of claim, you then want to give some examples of fruits that contain high content of vitamin C. So that will make your claims more clear. Okay. All right. Now, let's not talk about indicate or relate because they are not that common. Let's talk about summarizing. So summarize, what exactly is summarize? Okay, so summarize could be an instruction by itself. Like if you're doing IELTS task 1, they ask you to summarize key features that you have to identify from a chart. Okay, so that means you don't just want to write everything that you see. You want to select to report only important information. So you sort of need to have a guideline to help you identify information that's considered important, right? So could you think of any guideline that you can use to identify important features? One example is the largest quantity. So when you're reading a graph, you're going to come across certain variables that have a very high magnitude or has the highest magnitude in terms of, I don't know, mass, like kilograms or percentage terms, could be anything, right? So that's one thing that you want to report, okay? Any highest point, any lowest point. So you want to report all those. Okay. So basically those are the direction words that you want to be familiar with. Okay. Let's have a look at this statement here. It says that the developing Asian countries will never rival the Western counterparts due to lack of innovations and creative thinking. Assess the validity of this claim and what arguments are provided to support it. Is it a sound argument? Okay. So when we are in this area, right, when we talk about validity of a claim and soundness, we have to talk about something we call valid argument. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly is a valid argument. So previously, we know that argument is nothing but a combination of a claim and justification, right? Argument is just a claim and a justification. Okay, but there are many different ways to justify our claim. Right. Now, I like to call this reasoning for simplicity, okay? There are many different methods of reasoning. Okay. One method of reasoning is called deductive. Right, deductive reasoning. The other is called inductive reasoning. So what's the difference between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning? Now let us first focus on deductive reasoning. deductive reasoning, you have to refer to what we call valid argument forms. Okay, let's talk about deductive reasoning first, right? Deductive reasoning. Okay, you have to refer to argument forms. So what are the argument forms? One is called modus ponens, and that's the Latin term. And it looks something like some physics formula. If P then Q, P, therefore Q. So what on earth is this? If P then Q, P therefore Q. So the first part of modus ponens, this is called a principle. Okay, it's a principle. It could be considered a law or a theory. So it tells you when something happened, then what next will happen. This one right there, this P, this is just an example of an event that confirms the antecedent. So antecedent is this. This is antecedent. Okay, so antecedent is the condition. This has to be satisfied. And when this is satisfied, Q will occur. So we call Q a consequent. Okay, so again, antecedent is an example of an event. P right here in this if clause is the antecedent, which is a condition that has to be satisfied. And Q is a consequent, which is the event that will occur once the condition is satisfied. Now that little P underneath the if clause is an example of an event that confirms the antecedent. And this Q over here is just an example of an event that confirms the consequent. All right, let's have a quick look at an example. If I say, if we work hard, we will become successful. Okay, so that right there is a theory. This could be a personal theory. All right. So to convince you, I need to give you an example that confirms the antecedent. So it has to be something to show hard work. So if we are a student, then we could say some things like, we could just pick a random names, okay? Say Jane. Jane always review her lesson. Okay. She would sit and study for 3 hours a day after class session. All right. For 3 hours a day after class. So that event confirms the consequent. If the consequent, if the condition or antecedent is satisfied, then this will become true. We will become successful. So success in terms of academic success could be defined as good grades, something like that. Jen always review her lesson. She should study for 3 hours a day after class. Therefore, she managed to pass her exams with exceptional grades. Okay. So how's that? Let's look at something a little bit more simple. What if I say, if a number is evenly divisible by 2, that number is called an even number. Again, so this is like a theory or rules. So now next will come an example. So if I have number 24, so 24 is evenly divisible by 2. So what does it mean? Evenly divisible by 2? It means when you divide 24 by 2, there is no remainder. Okay? So for that reason, according to the principle, we could say 24 is an even number. All right. So that's modus ponens. Now, so far, these examples are considered valid. These are valid argument form, right? Starting from James example all the way to this number example. This is known as valid because it follows the formula. Okay? But what if I have something like if it rains, if it rains in Bangkok, we'll have a traffic jam. If it rains in Bangkok, we will have a traffic jam. That is true, isn't it? Every time it rains, we have a traffic jam. Let's assume that this is always true. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to say is tomorrow it is forecast that there will be there will be rain. Okay, and then I say for that reason, we, sorry. I made one mistake. What I mean to say is, we will have a traffic jam. Let's not do this. Let me change another example completely. Sorry about that, guys. Let's say if
so they still pay you minimum wage, like 23.50.
if a person is infected with COVID, okay, he or she will have a high fever. Suppose this apply to all cases of COVID, okay? If you have COVID, you have high fever. Well, this is the case. Now, if you go and say Jane has a high fever, and then you conclude that, therefore, Jane has COVID. Now, this is not valid. It is not valid because you start by confirming the consequent. So from the if clause, you have if P then Q, where your P is being infected with COVID. This is your P. Let me just pick another color. This is your P. And your Q is that you have high fever. So when you say Jane has a high fever, you confirm Q. And then you come to a conclusion that Jane has COVID, which is your P. So you alter the sequence. The sequence is P and then Q, not Q and therefore P. So what happened here is that your arguments become invalid. And is no longer a strong argument because somebody could argue with you and say that just because Jane has a high fever, she doesn't need to have COVID because there are many other diseases out there that will cause you to have high fever, right? If you are, for example, infected by tetanus virus, bacteria, you can have high fevers too. A bad cold can give you a high fever. So it's not just COVID that gives you high fever. So this becomes an invalid argument. Right. Okay, so I like to give you more examples, but it will be after the break. Okay, so this has been an hour and 7 minutes. Let's take a 10 minutes break and then we'll have some more fun. All right. We are back. Okay, so we have to look at valid argument forms based on modus ponens. If P then Q, P therefore Q. Next, let's look at another valid argument form called modus tollens. So modus tollens look like this if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. All right. So how does it work? Let's give an example. If I say, if someone lives in Bangkok, then he lives in Thailand. If someone lives in Bangkok, he lives in Thailand. Sounds good, right? And if I say some things like James doesn't live in Thailand, therefore James doesn't live in Bangkok. If someone lives in Bangkok, he lives in Thailand. But James doesn't live in Thailand, doesn't live in Bangkok. Sounds like a valid argument form because follow this formula right there. So living in Bangkok is a condition that has to be satisfied. That's P. If that is satisfied, then that's what follows. Someone lives in Bangkok, he lives in Thailand. James doesn't live in Thailand, that's negative Q. Therefore, James doesn't live in Bangkok, that's negative P. And this makes sense because when you make such a statement that say James doesn't live in Thailand, so throughout the 74 provinces in Thailand, to check each one of them, you will not see any James. You won't see James in any of those provinces. So we can come to a conclusion that James is not going to even be in Bangkok. However, if we alter the sequence, if someone lives in Bangkok, he lives in Thailand. Now, if we go and say James doesn't live in Bangkok, and you come to a conclusion that James doesn't live in Thailand. So when you do this, you're not following the formula. So the formula say, if you live in Bangkok, you live in Thailand. James doesn't live in Bangkok. You go and you deny the consequent first before you deny the, you deny the antecedent first before you deny the consequent. So that right there becomes an invalid argument. Okay, this becomes an invalid argument. So what's up with this invalid argument? What's wrong with it? Well, it will make your argument less strong, because people can go and attack you. They could say, hey, just because James doesn't live in Bangkok, this is not enough to conclude that he doesn't live in Thailand, because he might be living in another province. It could be living in Pattaya, Chiang Mai, Phuket, anywhere. So that's why this is an invalid argument. Okay? So I hope that you understand the difference between valid and invalid argument so far. But the valid argument forms continue. We have seen only two. Let's look at the third form. So the third form is called syllogism. Syllogism. That's the only form that has an English name. So what does it look like? It looks like this. If A then B, and if B then C, A therefore C. Okay? Looks like this. So let's develop an argument that is based on syllogism. Colgate has what we call fluoride. Okay? And fluoride has the potential to prevent tooth decay. So, Colgate can prevent tooth decay. Okay, when we look at this argument and try to identify which is what is what. So we see the Colgate that represent variable A, and fluoride with its potential to protect tooth decay, that's variables B. Okay, so since Colgate has fluoride and fluoride can prevent tooth decay, then we can draw a conclusion that Colgate can prevent tooth decay. In fact, I made one mistake here. Fluoride is B, but potential to prevent tooth decay is C. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, let's talk about sound argument. So sound argument has to be based upon argument that is valid first. If an argument is invalid, it's automatically unsound. Let's look at one example. If I say, okay, I'm going to use a previous example. If someone lives in Bangkok, he lives in Thailand. Okay. Now, if I talk about somebody's famous, like Donald Trump, if I say Donald Trump doesn't live in Bangkok. Therefore, he doesn't live in Thailand. Okay. Now, first of all, you would think that all these statements are true, right? The principle is true. Donald Trump doesn't live in Bangkok. That is also true. Donald Trump is not in Thailand. Yes, that is true. Every statement here is true. But is it a sound argument? No, it is not a sound. This is invalid and unsound. Okay, because even though you speak the truth, but your argument is weak. Because if you remove the word Donald Trump and we replace it with something else, then we can see that just because someone doesn't live in Bangkok, this is not enough to say that the person is not in Thailand. Like say this person commit a crime in Bangkok, right? So, and somebody's report the person to the authority. So they have to search for him. Now, before they begin to search for him in overseas country, say this guy come from the US and he committed a crime in Thailand. Okay, so before we go and send some force to the US to find this guy, we have to look inside our country first, right? So if we search in Bangkok and we can't find them, it doesn't mean we should go to America next. We have to search in other cities, other provinces. We have to search throughout the country. And if we don't find him, then we could decide that he's not in Thailand. Unless, of course, we get a tip off that, okay, he's going to, somebody spot him at the airport, try to catch a flight to somewhere. Well, that's a different case scenario. Okay. All right. So this is invalid and sound. So even though you are speaking the truth, this could be an unsound argument. So how do we make this a sound argument? We just have to alter the sequence. So instead of saying that Donald Trump doesn't live in Bangkok, we are going to change this and say Donald Trump doesn't live in Thailand. All right. And conclusion, if he doesn't live in Bangkok. Okay. Now this is a better version. Okay. So every statement is now true, and this follow the form of modus tollens, if P then Q not P. So this qualify for an argument that is not just valid, but also sound. So this is an example of a sound, valid and sound argument. So this is valid. Now it becomes valid and sound, okay? Valid and sound. All right, now let's go back to this example. I'm going to make a copy of this statement. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change some information here. I will use some things like sulfuric acid. instead of fluoride. Okay, now instead of toothpick, yeah, that's it. Also, I'm not gonna say fluoride. I'm replacing the word fluoride with sulfuric acid. So we have sulfuric acid here. So the statement says Colgate has sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid has the potential to prevent tooth decay. So Colgate can prevent tooth decay. So how would you evaluate this argument? Is it valid or is it not valid? So if we try to identify all these variables here, Colgate is A. I mean, let's just write the word Colgate, right? And when you say has sulfuric acid, we could put like an equal sign and say sulfuric acid. All right, so the equal sign just represent the relationship between Colgate and sulfuric acid. In this case, it suggests that Colgate contains sulfuric acid. All right, and the statement that says sulfuric acid has the potential to prevent tooth decay. The sulfuric acid equal tooth decay prevention. Okay, sulfuric acid is prevent tooth decay. Now, my brother, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay. So sulfuric acid, tooth decay prevention. Now we can say that Colgate can prevent tooth decay, or Colgate equals to tooth decay prevention. So it follows the valid argument forms, right? If A then B, if B then C, A therefore C. So we have to say that this argument is valid. So it's actually a good argument because it is valid. But because it contains some false information, because sulfuric acid, it does not really prevent tooth decay. So this part here is false, right? That part here, it is false. Okay? And also Colgate, it does not really contain sulfuric acid. That is also false as well. Right. So the conclusion should be false. So it contains a lot of false statements here. So this will be recognized as valid and unsound. So valid and unsound has a nickname. It's called fallacy. Fallacy. So fallacy is it's actually a good argument that is intended to deceive people, to trick people. And that's what con artists use to like taunt people out of their money. Okay, so this is a deception. This is not good. It's valid, unsound. Valid and unsound argument. Fallacy. Okay. All right, but it's gonna depend on the situation where you develop an argument. In some situation, your examiner or your reader doesn't really care about about your statement being true or false. If that's the case, then this kind of argument is fine. Okay, it is actually a strong one because it's valid. But if you're in a situation where not just the validity that matters, but also the soundness. So we talk about soundness, we talk about truth, talk about true statements, where you need to have source of your reference. Now, in that case, this is not okay. All right. Okay, so far you guys have you should be familiar with valid argument forms. So there are 3 forms. All goes by the Latin names. We have modus ponens, if P then Q, P therefore Q. We have modus tollens, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. We have syllogism, A then B, B then C, A therefore C. And later on, we're going to see how we're going to take advantage of this argument forms to develop a paragraph with high persuasive power. But before that, let's have a quick look at inductive reasoning. See what that means. So inductive reasoning differs from deductive in that you don't really need to have a principle or a law to refer to. You can base your reasoning entirely on your personal experience or observation. Okay, so we evaluate inductive reasoning in terms of strength, how strong it is, right? strong, strong or weak, based on your observation or evidence that you have had so far. So when you use inductive reasoning, you use inductive reasoning when you make an argument in the area where you cannot refer to any laws. Okay, if you're making a claim in scientific region, you can always refer to some law. But if you make an argument about something that is outside of the realm of science, then you probably need to use some induction or inductive reasoning. So let's give you a quick example. Okay. I could make a statement like, all swans are white. Okay. And this statement holds true as long as nobody has made a discovery of a swan that is not white. So this statement is based on the fact that no other color swan have been discovered. Okay? But when they discover swans that is not of white color, these statements become false. So in Western Australia, they have black swan. So these statements will then become false because we have a counter argument. Back in the ancient times, they used to believe that everything is made up of 5 elements. You know, it's made up of earth, water, winds, and fire. So these are like the basic elements that make up things that we have. So when they talk about an object falling from a height, their reasoning was that an object was seeking its birthplace, where it came from. Everything came from the ground. So it has to fall back onto the ground. So that's what the reasoning that has been believed for so many, many centuries. Okay? Because there was no evidence to counter this logic. So it was not until the discovery of gravity that rendered this belief false obsolete, no longer true. So now everyone knows why a certain object always falls from a certain height to a ground. And it's not just falling, it's also increasing in speed because it's accelerating at a rate of 9.8 meter per second square. It's speeding up. Every second is falling. The velocity keep adding 9.8, 9.8, 9.8. So that's the counter evidence, right? There are so many other beliefs in ancient times that have been proven wrong. Another example is a belief that the earth is the center of the universe, separate heaven from hell. And if you Google it, I think this belief was put forward by one of the most popular philosopher called Aristotle, students of Socrates. So he believes that the earth is the center of the universe, and it's that hell and heaven, the earth is somewhere in the middle. This belief has stood the test of time for thousands of years. But then this guy's name Nicholas Copernicus. So Nicholas Copernicus was a priest, a Polish priest. He lived in Poland, and he started this idea that maybe the earth is not the center of the universe, but the earth may just be a star, may just be an object that revolves around something bigger, and that's the sun. So he came up with this idea through his observation by looking into the sky, but he has no proof. He has no proof. But then Galileo Galilei, he's an Italian scientist. Now, he invented this telescope and proved once and for all that Nicholas Copernicus was right, and that the Earth is just another object in our solar system that orbits around the sun. It's no longer the center of the universe. So everyone has to, I believe that people who still choose to believe that the Earth center of the universe, I think those people are called flat earther or something. But you have to accept the new evidence and move on with the life. Okay, so that's how it works. So inductive reasoning, use it at your own risk. Its strength depends on evidence. Okay, when you do research, there are usually two different kinds of research out there. They something called qualitative research and quantitative research. And quantitative research, you usually use numbers, right? You use statistics. But there are some research out there where you don't really care about number, but you care about how repetitive something occur. For example, if you want to know why people drink alcohols, right? Why people drink alcohol? Let's make it a little bit more specific. Why Thai men aged between 21 to 30 drink alcohol? Let's not say Thai men. Let's say Bangkok, right? Why Thai men in Bangkok, not in the whole country, right? Drink alcohol. So why I'm not saying, Thai men who live in Thailand, because the sample size will have to be very large. But if I say Thai men aged between 21 to 30 in Bangkok, then the sample size doesn't have to be that large. Okay, so we just have to keep on asking Thai men, aged between 18 to 20, why you drink beer, okay? And after a few interviews, the answers become saturated because you keep getting the same answer. At first, you might find 4 different answers, and you're thinking, hey, there might be more. But as you keep interviewing more and more, the answers become repetitive now. That's when you reach a point of saturation. And then you can go and say, hey, there are 4 reasons why Thai men drink alcohol. A, B, C, and D. Okay? And why is this a good argument? Why should I believe it? Because there's no counterexample just yet. Okay? But if someone come along and give you the 5th reason why they drink alcohol, and there's not 4 reasons anymore, there's more than that. So you might have to, continue with your survey and increase the sample size and ask more people. All right. Okay, so let's go back to our previous statement. So it says that developing Asian countries will never rival Western counterparts due to lack of innovation and creative thinking. Assess the validity of this claim and what arguments are provided to support it. Is it a sound argument? Okay, let's assess the validity of this claim first. So how would you do it? So we have the formula, right? We have the formula. So we're going to use that formula. So the statement is say developing Asian country will never rival Western counterparts. Okay, that sounds like a conclusion. So basically what they're saying is Asian countries. I'm going to put Asian right here, Asian. So Asian countries don't have what? Creative thinking or innovation. Don't have innovation and creative thinking. Okay. And because you see this linking device, so that means this statement precedes the other one. And the other one says Asian will never rival the Western counterparts. So I'm gonna write Asian countries will never rival Western counterparts. Okay. So you see something, you spot something that you have seen before. This looks like a P. And this looks like a Q. Right? So in between, I could put this linking device. So Asian countries don't have innovation or creative thinking. Therefore, Asian country would never rival Western counterparts. So this must be based on some sort of mindset or some sort of principle. So what is it going to be? That if clause going to be if a country doesn't have innovation or creative thinking? Right, that's your P. Your Q is going to be that country. It's not going to develop, it's not going to grow, it's not going to advance. There's choices of word you could use here. It's not going to develop. Okay, so can you evaluate this argument? It says, so the if clause say if a country doesn't have innovation or creativity, it's not going to develop. Asian countries don't have innovation or creative thinking, therefore it's not. So this is actually a valid argument. This is valid. But just being valid alone doesn't mean this is a sound argument. Because to say whether it's sound or not, everything has to be true. So you need to ask yourself, are you going to accept this principle? So if you accept this principle, then that means you believe that these two things are precedents to development. So development depends on innovation or creative thinking, one or the other. So if you don't believe in this principle, you can challenge this principle and say, hey, this is not true. This is not a good theory or not a law. Where does this come from? Okay. And if you can challenge that, then you can say that this is not sound. But if you cannot challenge it, then you have to accept this. And then it's become a sound argument. Okay. All right, so I'll leave you to think about it. Can you challenge any of this? Can you think of any Asian countries that actually can rival the Western counterparts? Yeah, you can pick any Western country and maybe compare with one Asian country, maybe one Southeast Asian country, say Singapore, for example. Okay, and you can compare. Now you need something quantifiable, like GDP mostly, right? We look at GDP, we look at some economic indicators to compare, the development. Okay, and I believe that Singapore has higher GDP than many, Western countries, at least New Zealand. Okay, so I'll leave you to think about that. Next, we're going to be looking at this brainstorming techniques. So when you're in an exam, you don't have so much time to generate ideas. So you need to use a method that can help you to generate ideas fast enough, right? Because when you do this exam, you don't have an hour, you have 40 minutes. And in 40 minutes, you have to do three main things. You need to plan, you need to write, and you need to check your work. Planning is important. We talked about why we have to plan already. So there's no question about why we have to plan, right? We need to plan. Without a plan, we're not going to make it through to the end. Okay. Now, let's have a look at this method they call free writing. So what exactly is free writing, and should we use this approach to generate idea, for example? So to cut the long story short, free writing is use time to actually force you to think fast. So it obeyed the principle that we are put under stress. Is our when we start when our adrenal glands start releasing adrenaline, it's going to help turn on some of the lobes or the cells in our brain so that we are able to recall something that we learned a long time ago. Yeah. So when you're under stress, it will come back to you. That's the belief. That's the principle behind free writing. So to do this, you need to time yourself. So we use timing as the method to stress you out. So how much time do we need? Well, if in the test you don't have more than 10 minutes, so give yourself, say, 3 minutes. And this free writings means you can write whatever that comes to your mind. And you don't go and you don't try to evaluate idea. You're not going to look at the ideas and say and judge whether it is good or bad. Just keep on going for 3 minutes straight, and then we come back and try to go through and select the ones that only work. But I'm going to tell you right off the bat that this is not going to work. It is very time consuming, and I don't recommend this for any kind of writing. Okay, let's move on to another technique. And I wish they came up with a better name, but they call this technique listing. So what exactly is listing? Okay, so listing is a combination of analysis. So when you read a statement, you have to analyze to see the relationship across all the variables. Okay, and then we're going to sort of create an ideas generating plant or station. Okay, so imagine we have power station, but instead of generating electricity, we use this to generate ideas, and we have 4 of them usually. Okay, so we're going to visit the first plant and see how much it can generate idea. So we turn it on and let it generate some ideas. Okay, and then we visit the next plant, turn it on, let it generate idea. The third plant, turn it on, generate idea. The fourth plant, turn it on, generate ideas. Yeah, that's basically how it works. Okay, and after 5 minutes, then we come and see if the ideas that have been generated are promising or not. So you're going to decide whether you can come up with some justification to back up your points or your ideas. You may have a good idea, but if you cannot justify it, then you have to throw it away. You have to throw it away because there's no mark just for presenting an idea that cannot be explained or justified. There's no mark for that. All right. So nothing is better than a good example. So let's have a look at an example where we could adopt this strategy to generate ideas. Okay. Because I'm going to have to go to my photo albums to download a picture, an image. I will have to stop my screen sharing for a few seconds. Okay, so I'm here at my oops. There we go. Okay, let me put my screen back on. Start sharing. And we are back. All right, let's go and read some of these statements. So we say that in a recent survey conducted in this country, it was found that up to 20% of 12-year-olds in some schools were showing early signs of nicotine addiction. And then it says in the 18 to 20-year age bracket, the percentage was as high as 70%. And a large contributing factor to this high level of addiction is attributed to the uncensored television advertising of cigarettes. And for these reasons, all cigarettes advertising should be banned. So when you complete this statement, the first question you have to ask yourself is, where is the claim? You only respond to the claim, right? Nothing else. So you don't need to argue whether, this 12 years old or the young people, teenager, are they really addicted to cigarettes? That's not what they care. You need to know what they care. You need to be able to identify the claim. All right. So the claim is usually the last sentence, but to be sure, you want to look for signposts like for these reasons. When you say transitional words like for this reason or therefore or as a result, that's when they're about to come to a conclusion. So this suggests that this last sentence right here, that's their claim. So their claim is that they believe that by banning cigarette advertising, they're going to achieve what? A reduction in the rate of nicotine addiction. So that's what they believe. So let's break this down. So what is this claim? Is it like a cause of a problem? They believe something caused the problem, or they believe some approach can solve the problem? Because you see this word should, so you know this sounds more like a solution. So we are given a claim in the form of solution, and it says that cigarette advertising, it's not just cigarettes, right? It says cigarette advertising. It's the cigarette advertising. Or why can't I write here? It's not working. Oh. Okay, so cigarette advertising should be banned. And that's the claim. And it's also a suggestion. So we're gonna put claim / suggestion. And they want to do this because they're expecting what? They're expecting a reduction in the rate, in the percentage of young smokers. So I'm gonna write reduction in the percentage of young smokers. That's what they want to see. So what gives them an idea that cigarette advertising should be banned? If you go back to the middle sentence, it says a large contributing factor to this high level of addiction is attributed. So when we see this word attributed, then we know that they talk about cause and effects. And the cause is going to be what is going to be right behind this word. So uncensored television advertising of cigarette, that's your cause. So that means this high level of addiction has to be the effect. And this effect is also a problem. Okay, so we're going to write, what should I write here? When I go teenage nicotine addiction. So we identify this as a problem. And that middle statement tells you that they believe the cause is cigarette advertising, right? Yes. So am I right? Cigarette advertising. Okay. So after analysis, we sort of understand why they came up with this stupid idea. I mean, it doesn't have to be stupid, but yeah, we sort of understand why they came up with this idea, because they would first believe that there is some correlation between cigarette advertising and nicotine addiction. Okay, so they decide to stop cigarettes from being advertised so that less young people will smoke. All right, so we now understand the logic, okay? So this by itself is already an argument. This by itself is an argument because they have a claim and they have reasons behind the claim. Now, if you're going to be on their side, then you have to, make some contribution. So you will have to explain, because what they've done is they tell, oh, this has a relationship with that, but they don't tell you why they have a relationship, right? For example, like I say, 8 is an event number, but I'm not telling you why 8 is an event number, or 5 is a prime number, but I'm telling you why 5 is a prime number. So your job would be to explain, for example, why the cigarette advertising can really cause or lead to nicotine addiction. That's your job to explain, right? If you wish, or if you want to agree with this claim. But before we do that, let's build some of our idea generating plans. Okay, so we're gonna call the first plans clarify or clarification. Okay, that's our first plan. The next plan, we're gonna call it awareness. The next plan, we're gonna call it 4. And the last plan, we'll call it against. Okay, I'm going to separate all these plans with these vertical lines. Okay, so it will look like a table with 4 columns. Okay, now the best way to generate ideas is to ask some questions. So the questions that you should ask to clarify is you have to go back to the variables you have identified earlier. And then ask yourself if there's any chance somebody might see things differently from you. Okay? So if you believe someone will perceive something or have a different perception of something from you, then that's when you want to give your own definition, right? Back in the day, there was this question that um, asked whether humans will continue to develop if they stop space exploration project. Yeah, it's very short. And then they ask, you think so? Now, before you go on a journey of having to write so many words, you want to ask yourself, do you have enough knowledge to talk about space exploration project and human development, especially when you don't have access to any external information sources? You're on your own. So if you don't have enough knowledge, if you don't know anything about astronomy, you don't know anything about science, you first want to define human development first. You want to define human development. You can do it your way. Because in the exam, you don't have to quote anyone. You don't need reference. You're on your own. So the first thing you want to do is give yourself a definition of human development. What does human development means to you? What's the most important aspect of human development? If you have medical background, then you want to define this word with your medical knowledge. So you want to say some things like, but the most important aspects of human development is health, or average lifespan of human. If people don't need, as long as people don't fall sick, or they have extended longevity, then that means human is actually developing, but in the sense of, in terms of health. But if you have economic background, then you can say some things along the line of, the most important development of human is economy. And you can go on and say that, well, without good economy, every other everything will come to stop, right? Okay, so you have to define human development in a way that you can use your knowledge to justify your claim. Okay, so I'm going to leave this to you. So you'll be looking at all these variables you have identified and ask yourself, is there anything that you should define, personalize your definition? Maybe let's have a look at this terms right there, nicotine addiction. Well, maybe you know what nicotine is, right? But your readers may not know. You have to assume that, whoever read your articles may not know as much as you. So this might be a good idea to talk a little bit about nicotine and how it could become addictive. So I'm going to write this question and you will answer in your own time. So what is nicotine and why it is addictive? All right. Moving on to awareness. So this plant of ideas generation is used to create awareness. In other words, You want to give people reasons why they should read your work. Why is your work important? Why do I have to care about your work? So to raise awareness, you want to be focusing on this problem that you have identified from the previous stage. So the problem is we identify with teenage nicotine addiction. So to create awareness, we have to think a little bit further about the impacts of this problem. So I'm going to write, what are the adverse impacts of teenage nicotine addiction? Okay, so you can start thinking about how it can adversely affect the health of young people. You can start thinking about how it's going to affect them in terms of their finance. Okay, so that should be all about the question that you can ask to create awareness. Now let's move on to this next column, 4. So you want to be on the same side as them. You have to look at this arrow, because this arrow represents relationship between two variables. And you have to go and explain in what way cigarette advertising could lead to nicotine addiction. So I'm going to put the questions right here. I'm going to say, how could, I'm going to put cig ads, right, lead to teenage nicotine addiction? So that's one of the first questions that you have to be able to answer. If you can't answer this, then you should not be on the same side as them. Now, what do you think should be the next question? So the next questions will be based on the second arrow. So this arrow is pointing from banning cigarette ads to reduction in the percentage of young smokers. So that's when you have to explain how do you think, how could the banning of cigarette advertising, how could this reduce the percentage of young smokers? So these are the two main questions you have to be able to answer. What if you can't answer either of these two questions? What does that indicate? It indicates that you should not agree with them. It's simple as that. If you can't answer these two questions, don't take their side, don't agree with them, because you will not have any content. You cannot write anything. Okay? But that's not all. Those are the two main questions that you have to be able to answer. But suppose you can answer these two questions, but still there are 100 more words that you need to write. What are the questions you could answer so that you can use the answer to write more words? The next question would be, what are some of the inherent benefits of the proposed solution? So they propose that cigarette advertising should be banned, So you will ask yourself, what are some of the inherent benefits of banning cigarette advertising? Okay, now when you answer this question, you don't have to focus on their expectation. You don't have to focus on how is this going to reduce the percentage of young smokers. You can talk about side effects, you can talk about other benefits. Think about recycling. Why do we recycling waste? Maybe our main goal is to reduce our pollutions, right? Because if we don't recycle, we have to burn, either burn or bury. Yeah, and either method is bad for the environment. If we incinerate or if we burn, well, we create greenhouse gases. If we bury, take up land. It's bad. So we recycle. So we recycle because we want to save the environment. But the inherent benefit of recycling is that it could save the cost of the manufacturer, of the company, because instead of having to buy raw material from the suppliers, they can just use stuff that they have already sold. Right. So you will see that there are 3 questions that you have to answer if you want to be on their side. Now let's look at the next column, against. So if you are on this side, you have switched from red corner to blue corners now, right? So from now on, they are your opponent. So you have to argue. You have to try to break every tide, everything that they make. Whenever they connect something to something, you want to break that chain. You want to break everything. Okay, let's have a look at the relationship that they have formed between these 2 variables. It says cigarette advertising leading to teenage nicotine addiction. You want to break this link first. So how are we going to break this link? So we're going to ask this question: in what way is this not true? In what way is cigarette advertising not the cause or a factor? It has nothing to do, right? Not the cause of teenage nicotine addiction. If you can answer this, this is monumental, very important. If you can answer this, you can go on and criticize the proposed solution that it can be ineffective because it's addressing the wrong cause. Yeah? So let's see if we can answer that question. Next. Now, suppose you have answered this question. The next best questions to answer is, how is the given proposal, right? How is, in this case, how is banning cigarette ads not an effective or efficient or practical solution? Yep. That's the next important question. If you can answer these 2 questions, then your arguments will be very strong. Okay. But are there more questions we should ask ourselves? Okay, let's see. Now, when somebody asks you, is this solution going to work? If you don't agree with them and you say, hey, this solution is not going to work, what do you think will be the next thing that they expect from you? Then they probably want to know, well, if this solution doesn't work, then what solution works, right? So that means you are not going to just stop here. You will have to carry on and think about solutions that will work. Now, how would you know which solution will work? You have to think about the causes of the problem. Now, some problems can be triggered by just one cause, but there could be multiple of those causes. It's going to be like an or condition where many events could happen, but not necessarily at the same time. For some other event to happen, like traffic jam, for example. Now we can say that traffic jams can result from heavy rain, could result from traffic disturbances like a car accident, or could result from what? A construction, right? Security checkpoint. It could result from anything, but none of them have to happen simultaneously or at the same time to have traffic jam, right? We can just have heavy rains alone, and we can have heavy rains alone, and the next minute we have traffic congestion. We don't need to have accidents. Okay, now, but some other problem, it requires many conditions to be true for it to happen. Yeah, like I would say global warming, for example. Global warming requires at least two conditions to be true. It requires heat energy from the sun, and it also requires greenhouse gases. So with one conditions being true while the others being false, we won't have global warming. Say we have a lot of greenhouse gases, we burn so many stuff, we burn a lot of fossil fuel, but if we don't have the sun, we won't have global warming. We will have another ice age. Or if we have the sun, but we don't have any greenhouse gases, we will have an ice age as well, because even though we have the heat from the sun, but there will not be anything to trap the heat, to keep the heat from getting reflected into the space. So global warming need two conditions to be true. Anyway, so we want to go and ask ourselves this question. Well, other than this cigarette advertisings, are there anything else that could contribute to teenage nicotine addiction? So I'm going to write, are there any other factor? Are there any other factors that can contribute to nicotine addiction? And don't forget the demographic here is says teenager. So we will say contribute to nicotine addiction for teenagers or among teenagers. All right. What time is it? We have 20 more minutes to go. Next. Okay, so if we can answer this question, and if it turns out that there are many other factors, then that means there could be more than one solution, right? There could be more than one solution. So the next question we're going to ask is, what are some of the better solutions? So better sounds kind of vague. So we're looking at solutions that are more effective, right? Because the previous or the proposed solution, we have already criticized it as being ineffective. So a better solution here would mean solutions that will do the job, will be more effective. That's it. Okay, so on a first glance, it is quite obvious that if you go against them, you will have so many questions to answer. So let's count the number of questions that we have on this side. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, we could ask another question. We could talk about what are some of the inherent benefits. So inherent benefits are like benefits that comes with the solutions when you implement them. What are some of the inherent benefits associated with those better solutions? All right, we don't know what those solutions are yet. All right, so let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We have 5. But if you want to agree, there are only 3. Okay, so there's an advantage right there. If you disagree with it, there's more to think, more to write. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna give you maybe 5 minutes, okay? 5 minutes to try to come up with your own ideas, try to answer some of these questions. So let's do that. 5 minutes. All right. You guys have any ideas? Let's look at the chat. All right. That's empty. Whoops. Okay. So what do you think is nicotine addiction and why is it addictive? All right. I'm not going to write down anything, okay? I'm just going to like give you an idea. So from what I know, nicotine is by itself is an addictive substance because it's give you good feelings. All right, when we smoke, of course, cigarette contains so many chemicals in it, but the one chemicals that will give you the good feeling or relaxed feelings is the nicotine. Right, we want nicotine in the cigarettes, but it's too bad because cigarette, you know, it doesn't just come with nicotine; it comes with so many other harmful chemicals in it. And where else could nicotine be found? Well, to the best of my knowledge, it's only found in tobacco products. And if they use tobacco products to make cigarettes, then nicotine can only be found in cigarettes, unless you guys can think of any other tobacco products that are not cigarettes. Next, awareness. What are the adverse impacts of teenage nicotine addictions? So, if you think about in terms of health, right, you probably have heard a number of respiratory diseases that are associated with smoking cigarette, starting with asthma. But well, asthma is not necessarily illness caused by cigarette, but it can smoking can exacerbate asthma. So if you already have asthma and then you smoke, it could make your conditions worse. All right. Another disease that is caused directly by cigarette, I think it's called a bronchitis, right? Bronchitis. So, um, to some uh, heavy smokers, well, probably not heavy smokers, to some people who have never smoked before and then start smoking, they might develop this illness called bronchitis. You guys might want to Google that a little more to if you want to know more about bronchitis, what it is, how does it affect, what organ is affected, then Google it. Okay. Next is emphysema. So emphysema is a disease that directly affects your lung, right? Emphysema. So is it going to cause your lung to be inefficient? So it's not going to be working at its full capacity. So that's emphysema. And last but not least, lung cancer. And I think lung cancer is popular enough. I think you sort of have an idea of what lung cancer is. Next, how could cigarette ads leads to teenage nicotine addiction? Well. So we're actually asking what is the thing that sits between cigarette advertising and nicotine addiction, right? What is sitting between advertisement and addiction? Now, if you ask me, I think it's curiosity. So imagine if you see something all the time, like all the time, at some point you may want to like, why don't I just give it a try? Just to see if it's the way it is advertised, right? Okay, so curiosity is what leads you down the rabbit hole. All right, so by the time you realize the harmfulness of smoking, you have already become addicted to it. So it's the curiosity. Next, how could the banning of cigarette advertising reduce the percentage of young smokers? Well, because it reduced the exposure. All right, when you ban cigarette ads, it reduces how often young people see acts of smoking. And when they see less act of smoking, then they will not be so curious about how cigarettes is going to make them feel, how smoking is going to make them feel. It's going to not be curious about that. What are some of the inherent benefits of banning cigarette advertising? Well, that's a hard one. So, if the cigarette advertising is banned, who will benefit from this? Um, well, I don't know. Probably well, so you have to think about products that serve the same purpose as cigarettes, right? Um, so if you think about a pain relief, for example. So say you get hurt, right? You got a bruise in your arm, right? You could ingest some tablets that will help to ease the pain, or you can use the spray. All right, there's some spray that you can spray directly to your bruise, and it will relieve the pain. So if the tablets business goes away, the spray business people are going to be very happy because, well, the competitors are gone, right? Okay. So you have to think about, you know, um, who's going to benefit if cigarettes go away, right? Yeah, but I cannot think of anything. I'm just giving you an idea. Next is, in what way is cigarette advertising not the cause of teenage nicotine addiction? Now that one is actually easy because we just happen to live in a country where advertising of cigarette is illegal. Yes, Thailand, I mean the Thai government, they have already banned the advertising of cigarette a long time ago, right? They banned that. So you don't see cigarettes being advertised anywhere, right? They banned it. But we still see a lot of young people smoking in public areas, right? Yeah. So obviously, it's not the advertising that that contributes to this teenage nicotine addiction. It's probably something else. Okay, so this obviously is a counterexample for this belief that advertising give rises to addiction. Well, in Thailand, come over here. We have a lot of young smokers, and guess what? They don't see advertisement of cigarettes. Next, how is banning cigarette not an effective or efficient or practical solution? Well, if the advertising is not the cost in the first place, if you talk about some other country where cigarettes are free to advertise, okay, and then suddenly you want to like lower the smoking rate and you start banning cigarette ads, it's not going to work because Thailand is a good example, right? The ban has been effective for so long, right? Ever since I could remember. I grew up not seeing a single cigarette advertisement, and I'm over 30 years of age, so the ban must have been in effect for more than 30 years. Right. But still, we do have a number of young smokers. So it's something else. So banning cigarette advertisement is not going to be effective. Right. So that's what we can say. Is it practical or not? Or is it efficient or not? Well, we don't have to worry about. In fact, if something is ineffective, you don't have to think about how it's going to be efficient or practical because it's failed to do its job, right? It can be eliminated from your choice. Next, are there any other, what do I say here? Are there any other factors that can contribute to nicotine addiction for teenagers? Well, I can think of one thing. I think it's the peer pressure, right? It's the peer pressure. Because you probably, as a teenager, you probably know what's good, what's bad. But if you decide to do something that is bad, it's probably because you have to do it so that you can fit in. So probably the peer pressure area, I can think of one. You have to think of the rest. Now, what are some of the better solutions? So if you are like me and you believe that peer pressure is one of the causes of nicotine addiction, then one solution might be to but it depends on who will have to implement the solutions, right? Okay. If you say the parents have to implement this solution, then I would say the parent have to be more present to the children and give them some guidance. Yeah, that sounds like the most relevant solution, given that cost. All right, I'll leave the rest of the questions for you to think. And next time we're going to put all these ideas in an outline. Okay. All right. So if you guys don't have any questions, I would like to wrap up this session. Right. Thank you so much for coming to the class. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time. You may go now. All right. See you next time. Thank you.